It is 7 o'clock. Good to have you with us. Russia is ramping up the rhetoric with talk of World War III this morning. Plus, there is a cost of living cabinet. The PM wants ideas about how to help people pay their bills. What are they considering? Plenty to put to the Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, in a few minutes' time. Plus, the Shadow Secretary of State for Transport, Louise Haigh. Plus, the Twitter taker triggering some terse tweets. We'll have all the fallout to Elon Musk's deal with a former British Army intelligence officer who has some concerns. It is Tuesday, the 26th of April. A real danger of World War III. The warning from the Russian foreign minister as new footage shows the suburban wasteland left in eastern Ukraine. An extraordinary moment of kindness in Kharkiv. We'll bring you a special report just after 8 o'clock. Dangerous for democracy. Fears after Twitter agrees with Elon Musk a $44 billion deal. Lockdown link. Scientists reveal a new line of inquiry into what could be behind a rise in hepatitis cases in children. We'll show you the new body cam footage released from the Alec Baldwin film set where a cinematographer was shot, including this exchange with the armourer. We'll be reporting from Lancashire as concerns grow for the welfare of 33-year-old Katie Kenyon, last seen 3 days ago. Spiking danger. The calls for a change in the law to make it a criminal offence. We speak to victims.
I couldn't support myself, I started being sick, and I personally don't remember anything really of the night.
Also ahead on the programme. Love it. The Bristol band Paterson are set to make a rare return to the stage as part of a Ukrainian benefit concert in their hometown. I'll be speaking to one of the group a little later on. And we'll be speaking to two guys who have lost a total of 22 stone together through a football-focused weight loss programme. Morning all. We begin with a warning from the Russian foreign minister who said that NATO is, in essence, engaged in a war with Russia, as he warned there was also real danger of it turning into World War III. All this with the UN Secretary-General due to hold talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin later today. So let's take a quick look at some of the latest developments. The US Defence Secretary is hosting a group of NATO defence ministers and senior military officials at an airbase in Germany. Our own Defence Secretary Ben Wallace will be present. Meanwhile, the government says 15,000 Russian troops have been killed since the invasion began. Well, in a TV interview, Sergei Lavrov has said that the West's military support for Ukraine means that NATO is, in essence, engaged in conflict with Russia. And well, here is what Sergei Lavrov said. The danger is serious, it is real, it should not be underestimated. Let's see if we can speak to Mark Stone. He's joining us now from Dnipro in the east of the country. Good to see you this morning, Mark. I mean, what are you and indeed others in Dnipro making of that which we've been hearing from Sergei Lavrov, World War III, proxy conflict with NATO?
Well, you know, at ground level, they're looking at this as a daily struggle. They're not looking at the big picture. They're not looking at this talk of World War III. There are so many different front lines in this war. It's often it's misleading to see it as a singular front line along the east of the country with the Ukrainians on one side and the Russians on the other. It isn't. In towns and villages across the east, across the north and across the south, there are multiple front lines, multiple villages, multiple fights taking place. And that is ongoing every single day. We've travelled to the far east of the country, to towns that are pretty much encircled now by the Russians. One town, Lysychansk, one road in and one road out if you are on the Ukrainian side. And there is real concern in that town that it will be within the next days or weeks. It will be encircled completely, and it will be another town that falls to Russia, another town that is destroyed. There are reports as well overnight of the Russians amassing troops to the south of here, about an hour and a half's drive to the south of where we are in Dnipro, where they will attempt potentially over the course of the next few days and weeks. And remember, it takes them a long time to take these cities because their supply lines are not good and their morale is not good. But there will be an attempt, it's thought, to push north. Effectively, a pincer movement, very traditional military doctrine. They're pushing from the east. They've got forces in the north. They've got forces in the south, and they are trying to unite those two divisions of their military, and that from there they would push west. And I think that, along with so many other challenges, will be front and centre in Ramstein Air Base as defence ministers meet this morning.
Mark, many thanks indeed. Very pleased to say we can now speak once again to the Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, who's joining us from central London. Mr Heappey, very good morning to you. Do hope you're well. Wonder if we might start with that which we were just hearing from Mark, the action that is taking place in the east of the country. I mean, Boris Johnson himself has already expressed concern for the Donbass region. I mean, is there now an inevitability to the Russians taking territory in that part of the country?
I don't think there's an inevitability at all. I mean, I think the last time that I had the privilege of speaking for the government in the morning was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we were reflecting then on how imminent the demise of Mariupol may be, and yet those fighters that are in Mariupol defending it so heroically are still going 3 weeks later, and they are soaking up a huge amount of Russian combat power as that defence continues. So I think that what we will see in the Donbass is a very different type of conflict to the one that we saw around Kyiv. I think we'll see a conflict between two forces that are much more evenly balanced, where the Ukrainians have the advantage of defensive positions that have been dug in and prepared over the last 8 years. And that's going to make it an extraordinarily difficult nut for the Russians to crack. And I think that with all of the support that the Ukrainians are getting from around the world, there's every chance that the Ukrainians can see them off.
We know that the Ukrainians certainly have been fighting and fighting hard. Your boss, Ben Wallace, was briefing MPs yesterday. Viewers can see it on the screen. Perhaps as many as 15,000 Russian personnel have been killed, perhaps as many as 30 of the battalion tactical groups.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. Those are the numbers that the Ukrainians report, and that's vast. That is nearly 3 times as many dead as Russia suffered in the first Chechen war. And I mean, that is nobody should rejoice in that. That's 15,000 Russian families who haven't got their son or husband or brother coming home. But people in Russia should be clear that that is because the Russian plan has been defined by incredible hubris, massive political interference in military plan making. And we're seeing exactly the same now, where there is pressure from Moscow to deliver a victory by the 9th of May so that Putin can have a nice parade through Red Square. Even though that makes no military sense. The weather in the Donbass over the last week or so has been absolutely awful. And so driving the Russian army to launch an offensive now, simply so Putin can have a nice day in the sun on May the 9th, is just going to cost Russia thousands more lives. Now, if you're on the side of the Ukrainians and you want the Ukrainians to succeed in defending their territory, that Russian hubris is a massive advantage for Ukraine. But if I was a Russian family, I'd be deeply concerned that those in the Kremlin were not acting in my interests.
Indeed. On that point then, Minister, what more can you tell us about the additional assistance that we're providing? A lot of kind of speculation, perhaps informed speculation in the papers, about Stormer vehicles being sent, perhaps as providing some form of radar as well. What more can you tell us on that?
Well, that's exactly right. And, you know, the Secretary of State has been very, very clear that Russia only has itself to blame, because every time we have gone up a gear in terms of what we are providing, it is a direct consequence of the way that Russia has conducted its operations in Ukraine. Now, Stormer is an air defense facility that is mounted on an armored vehicle. We think that that's necessary in order to give greater protection to Ukrainian ground forces and the civilian populations in some cities. We have been scouring the earth for 152 millimeter artillery ammunition, which is the artillery ammunition that the Ukrainians would need for their existing guns. But we've also now been working with allies around the world to provide them with 155 millimeter, which is the NATO standard caliber. And that means that hundreds of thousands more artillery rounds are now flowing in from the United States, particularly to Ukraine. There are countries in Eastern Europe that are giving up sophisticated air defense systems, hundreds of tanks. This is an amazing effort, and the UK has been to the fore in corralling it.
The response, though, from the Russians, in particular, the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, warning that this could be us on the precipice of World War III, already suggesting that Russia is not fighting Ukraine, it's fighting NATO. I mean, obviously, that clearly removes, the Ukrainians' agency in all of this. But I wonder what you make of the brinksmanship in terms of the rhetoric about potentially, a third global conflict.
Well, look, there's a couple of points of distinction. Firstly, the donor community is not NATO. NATO has been involved in reinforcing its eastern flank. So a lot of the deployments of our troops, ships and aircraft to Eastern Europe are very much under the NATO flag. But the donor effort is something that is being brought together by countries that are from, yes, many of them are from NATO, but others are from beyond, the Australians, the Kiwis, the Canadians. The Canadians are in NATO. So, that is, it's not NATO that is doing the military aid. But Sergei Lavrov might also reflect that the reason that there is a war in Ukraine right now is because Russia rolled over the borders of a sovereign country and started to invade their territory. NATO is not an expansionist offensive alliance. NATO is a defensive alliance. And all of this noise from Moscow about somehow their attack on Ukraine being a response to NATO aggression is just utter nonsense.
Minister, I wonder if we can move away from your brief now to perhaps the biggest individual issue facing politics and indeed the public domestically, the cost of living. We understand that there is to be a cost of living cabinet today. The Prime Minister very keen to get as many ideas as possible, for as little money as possible, given what we've been spending over the past few years. What is the hope from this meeting this morning?
Well, look, the reason that the meeting is happening and the reason that so many meetings on the cost of living happen in government every single day is because the moment that you go out and knock on doors in your constituency, what you find is that is the thing that hardworking families across the United Kingdom are most concerned about. The cost of living is getting to such a point now where even people on good wages are struggling to make ends meet, and they are looking to the government to help them with solutions. Now, what they will decide in Cabinet this morning is for them, and it's certainly not for me to try and trail, but already for this year alone, the government's put £22 billion of targeted funding in to support those who are struggling most with the cost of living. And the fact that Cabinet is meeting today to discuss it more shows you just how seriously this is taken by the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, and the rest of their colleagues in Cabinet.
But isn't the simple truth, though? I've read the article. The Sun was briefed on the cabinet meeting taking place this morning, and one of the biggest announcements, one of the biggest policies that was flagged up in the article was removing tariffs on rice. Now, I understand that will help, but we're talking pennies and not pounds. Isn't the simple truth that there's not an awful lot that the government can do without spending money?
Well, look, there's no doubt about it that these interventions are expensive. £22 billion of government intervention to assist with families with their cost of living is already huge. There'll be other levers that government can pull, and no one of them will be a golden bullet. But cumulatively, if you can provide people with lots of small savings across their cost of living, then cumulatively that does start to make a difference. So I wouldn't sniff at the removal of a tariff on a particular food type, because if that sits alongside a reduction in fuel duty at the pumps, which has happened, if that sits alongside a rising of the personal allowance, an increase in the national living wage, cumulatively you can start to see, and assisting people with their energy bills, cumulatively you can start to see how that starts to ease the pressure on the families who are struggling the most.
Minister, I promise you I am not being sniffy about cheaper rice. You have no idea how much curry I eat. I do, however, want us to conclude on just on a couple of related topics around freedom of speech. Angela Rayner, of course, you will by now have seen that the article, such as it was, in the Mail on Sunday. I have to admit, I feel slightly uncomfortable this morning. Yesterday, clearly, we were talking with your colleague Chris Philp, the article itself, misogynistic, sexist and all the rest of it. And then we hear that the Speaker of the House of Commons has summoned the Mail on Sunday's editor for a meeting, presumably to chastise him. Does that sit easily with you? You know, the Speaker of the House of Commons summoning a journalist to explain their actions?
Well, look, Lindsay is fiercely independent, and rightly so. He is the Speaker of the House of Commons, and he must do what he thinks is in Parliament's interest. I would just reflect that, I don't think that the Speaker is trying to limit freedom of speech. In fact, my understanding, although I wasn't in the chamber yesterday to hear him say it firsthand, my understanding is that he made the point of saying that he wants to protect freedom of speech and that the role of the press lobby in Parliament is hugely important. But there are female colleagues in the House of Commons on all sides of the House who have to put up with a level of sexism, misogyny every day that frankly is unfair. It is a disadvantage to them that I don't have to face as a male member of Parliament or a male minister. And I just can't believe that in 2022, we're in a place where the story that was written on Sunday was written. I can't believe that one of my colleagues...
The story was written because your colleagues briefed.
I think it's despicable. Look, I just find it outrageous that colleague who sits within a party that has delivered 2 female prime ministers, that has 2 women in the great offices of state, that is surrounded by amazingly capable female MPs on the Conservative benches as well as over on the Labour benches too. I just don't know what Parliament they think they sit in. I find the whole thing ridiculous, offensive. I'm sorry for Angela. And if the Speaker is going to put a shot across the bows about the way that women in Parliament are being reported, that's a good thing. I have no doubt that he is protecting freedom of speech and he won't want to see that infringed. But I do think that Westminster has just got itself into a mess and it looks awful.
Yeah. To continue with the freedom of speech theme, what are your thoughts about the taking private of social media platform Twitter by Elon Musk? I mean, the bill's certainly up there and the board obviously still has to agree. But do you have any concerns about the richest man in the world owning perhaps one of the most significant social media platforms?
Well, the government doesn't have a view. The government will let this go through as a transaction. But there is... I think Elon Musk has made some good noises about being a protector of freedom of speech. I think I've also heard him say some stuff about ending the anonymity of the trolls on Twitter. And those of us who use Twitter as part of our jobs will know that Twitter can be an absolute sewer sometimes because people do have anonymity and that makes them very brave when they have anonymity. If Twitter is going to be cleaned up as a platform, be somewhere where freedom of speech is championed, but that anonymous abuse becomes more difficult, then that's a good thing. But that's my view. The government's view is that this is a takeover bid on which we have no view at the moment.
James CP, great to have you on the programme, as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Neil. Thank you.
Well, as we were just mentioning there, the billionaire Elon Musk has struck a deal to buy Twitter in a takeover worth, get this, $44 billion. Sky's US correspondent Greg Milam has the detail.
Even a few days ago, it seemed Elon Musk's dream of owning Twitter was doomed to fail. Once again, the world's richest man has shown how dangerous it is to bet against him. In a statement confirming the takeover, Musk said, "Free speech is the bedrock of a functioning democracy, and Twitter is the digital town square where matters vital to the future of humanity are debated. I also want to make Twitter better than ever by enhancing the product with new features, making the algorithms open source to increase trust, defeating the spam bots, and authenticating all humans. Twitter has tremendous potential. I look forward to working with the company and the community of users to unlock it."
Cargo Dragon take flight.
But what will a man who's turned his other pet projects like Tesla and SpaceX into world beaters do to a platform that is a voice for millions?
I certainly think it's beginning of a significant new chapter for Twitter. And I think that the platform has got a lot of problems, and this could be the solution it's been crying out for. But I fear that Elon Musk will bring lots of the controversy that him and his account already brings with it. And I think that that sort of attention, that sort of those sorts of problems are ones that Twitter could do without. And I think that users and staff at Twitter will probably be very frightened today of what the future holds for the platform with Elon Musk in charge.
It'll be a big change too for Twitter's employees in offices like these, who now find they have one of the most mercurial and unpredictable of bosses. And they, like everyone else, might ponder what it means when the richest person on the planet has control of one of its most influential of platforms. All that remains open to question. Elon Musk has promised he will make Twitter better. The world wonders what that will look like. Greg Milam, Sky News, Los Angeles.
I think it's fair to say there has been a range of reaction to the sale. Let's take a look at some of it. Starting with Florida's Republican governor, Ron DeSantis. He, of course, tweeted this. The offer to buy Twitter is a good deal for shareholders and raises the prospect that the platform will be a place where free speech can thrive, not a tool for narrative enforcement, perhaps predicting the return of Donald Trump to Twitter. Meanwhile, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren labelled the deal dangerous for our democracy. She said billionaires like Elon Musk play by a different set of rules than everyone, accumulating power for their own gain. Bill Barr, who led the US Justice Department's antitrust division under President Obama, suggested it might not be a done deal. He said that regulators would look hard to see whether there's a risk to competition and to consumers. That story, of course, featuring in the papers. Here's the Metro. It leads with billionaire Elon Musk winning his £35 billion takeover bid for Twitter. The Eye reports that the Prime Minister is considering what it calls a bonfire of policies to appease angry Tory backbenchers. The paper hears that two-thirds of the policies planned for the May's Queen's speech are now at risk. Here's the Telegraph. It links a recent surge in hepatitis cases in young children to the effects of lockdown and social distancing. And on the front of the Sun, pubs will be allowed to stay open longer during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee weekend. Still to come on the show, I'll be speaking to Labour's Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Hay as the party demands an emergency budget from the government to deal with the cost of living crisis. I'll chat to a former British intelligence officer and cyber expert about Elon Musk's Twitter takeover. And as Beijing faces the prospect of another lockdown, we'll chat with the World Health Organization's special envoy for the global COVID-19 response, Dr. David Nabarro, about the different approaches countries are taking in reaction to the pandemic. Now, US police have released crime scene photos and body cam footage from the investigation into the fatal on-set shooting allegedly involving Alec Baldwin. The cinematographer, Helena Hutchins, was killed in October after the actor was apparently handed a gun with live ammunition during filming.
Press isn't in here yet. Right. No, she's with us. Could you hold on 1 second, please?
Yeah, well, this body cam footage here, that's Alec Baldwin at the back of shot there. You saw him taking time out to answer his mobile phone after the incident.
What is your full name?
Hannah. H-A-N-N-A-H. Gutierrez.
How do you spell your last name?
G-U-T-I-E-R-R-E-Z.
What was that again?
G-U-T-I-E-R-R-E-Z.
Well, this is Hannah Gutierrez, also captured on a police body cam in the immediate aftermath of the shooting. Hannah was responsible for the safety of guns on set. She's now suing the weapons provider, alleging he supplied a mismarked box of ammunition containing live rounds. We also heard from the police on the body cam footage.
The last I got from her was it went in through her right and out the left back.
Well, 42-year-old cinematographer Helena Hutchins was killed in the incident. Following her death, work on Rust was suspended indefinitely. 10 children in the UK have needed a liver transplant as a result of developing acute hepatitis as cases continue to rise. Sky's Madeleine Ratcliffe is in the newsroom for us, has been taking a closer look. And the suggestion is, Madeleine, that this is somehow linked to lockdown. Exactly how?
Well, it's because there's far more cases than normal. We've had as many cases in 3 months as you normally have in a year, 114, and it's actually a more severe strain. Hepatitis is a fairly common illness in small children, not often very serious, but this seems different, and one of the explanations of that is it's caused by a different virus to normal, the adenovirus, which in itself is common. It causes pneumonia, sometimes cold and flu-like symptoms, conjunctivitis and diarrhea and vomiting. So children often get it, but it's very rarely leads to something like hepatitis. It's only in very rare cases where there's a complication. And the theory is at the moment that because children were locked down, they weren't mixing as much, had far less exposure to this very common virus. That's what has meant that they are more susceptible to getting ill and getting quite severely ill from it. This is what the woman who is investigating the surge in hepatitis for the UK Health and Security Agency, Dr. Meera Chand, said about it. She's quoted in the Telegraph saying, "We have a cofactor affecting a particular age group of young children, which is either rendering that infection more severe or causing it to trigger some kind of immunopathology. This could include a lack of prior exposure of that particular age group during the formative stages they've gone through during the pandemic." So children staying at home, far less mixing, which is normally how they're exposed to these common viruses. And that has led to this. It's one of those very unfortunate and unexpected consequences, potentially, of lockdown.
Madeleine, thanks very much indeed. Let's take a look at some of the day's other headlines. And concerns are growing for the welfare of 33-year-old Katie Kenyon, last seen in Lancashire 3 days ago. Police are continuing to question a 50-year-old man from Burnley on suspicion of kidnap. Detectives have been granted another 36 hours for questioning. Summer holidays are at risk for millions of Britons due to huge delays in renewing outdated passports. Ministers have urged holidaymakers to get their applications in as soon as possible, with one MP saying his constituents are having to cancel holidays, miss funerals and rearrange visits. The surge in demand comes after the lifting of COVID restrictions and delays in passport renewals during lockdown. A man in his late 20s is being questioned over the fatal stabbings of 4 people in southeast London and remains in custody. Emergency services were called to a house in Bermondsey yesterday morning, where 3 women and a man were pronounced dead at the scene. One of the victims' relatives was there.
I don't deserve it. She's a very lovely lady.
MPs have warned that drink spiking will remain an invisible crime unless more is done to improve awareness and support victims. A report by the Home Affairs Committee calls for spiking a person's drink to be made a specific criminal offence. Sky's North of England correspondent Gerard Tubb reports.
The beginning of a night out in Yorkshire for a 20-year-old earlier this month. It ended with her in hospital, convinced her drink had been spiked.
I just went all floppy, I couldn't support myself, I started being sick, and I personally don't remember anything really of the night. I was carried out by bouncers, I don't remember that, and bearing in mind I'd only had the 3 glasses of wine, that's not enough for me to just forget the whole night.
MPs say it's a heinous crime that should be a specific offence and the police should do more to gather data on spikers.
The Select Committee stresses that no one knows how prevalent spiking is. A spokesman told me they can't even be sure the statistics they use in their own report, gathered from Twitter, are accurate.
I think because the drugs leave the system quickly, more action is needed to collect a sample under chain of evidence as soon as possible and analyse it as soon as possible, because I think then that is the only way we'll get hard evidence that this is a true problem.
The government says it is taking the issue of spiking seriously.
We're working with the police across the whole country to make sure that they've got the right response and they can tackle the perpetrators of these crimes. And we also are looking at whether there is a need for a specific offence for spiking.
Those who believe they are spiking victims rarely go to the police. This report wants that to change, to lead to more prosecutions. Gerard Tubbs, Sky News, York.
Gotta love this. The first ever space tourists have returned from the International Space Station. Let's take a quick look. Well, this was the first time that NASA opened its space hatches to tourists. 3 businessmen paid $55 million for a week up on the ISS, which was extended to nearly 17 days due to the weather conditions. Nice holiday if you can get it. Time to see how the weather's looking down here.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Rest of the week mostly dry as high pressure extends from the north. However, it will be on the cool side. And it's been a mostly dry but chilly start this evening. A touch of frost and some fog patches. Cloudier across parts of Scotland and northeast England with some light showers. Overall, most places having bright spells and light winds today.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
This is sad news. A Japanese woman recognised as the oldest woman in the world has died at the age of 119, just months short of reaching 120. Kate Tanaka was certified by the Guinness World Records as the oldest living person in 2019. She died in southern Japan, where she spent her whole life. With Ms. Tanaka's passing, the mantle of world's oldest woman now rests with the French nun Lucille Rondon, aged 118. I confidently predict I will not be reaching that particular age. Let's take a quick look at some of the great pictures in the papers this morning. First up, The Guardian has this picture of Greenpeace activists squaring up to a Russian oil tanker in order to prevent it from delivering Russian oil into the Norwegian capital of Oslo. One of them holding a sign that says, "Oil fuels war." And just another example. So we've been seeing in Ukraine that, sometimes small people, the small guy, can actually win a big war. The Telegraph, if we take another look, has an incredible example of camouflage in the animal world. You might just be able to make out the 2 eyes there and there of a snow leopard blending in with its surroundings in the Tibetan highlands. Can't believe you managed to capture that one. And a slightly less threatening creature in the Times now. I'm not the only Sky News presenter who likes dogs. Cookie the cockapoo enjoying himself on a walk amongst the bluebells. This is exactly what I look like at 5 o'clock in the morning after my third coffee. Still to come on the programme, I will be speaking to a former British intelligence officer about potential security concerns following Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter. That's coming next. Welcome back. As the Russian foreign minister warns that NATO is effectively engaged in a war with Russia, Putin's forces continue to increase their attacks in the east of Ukraine. A little earlier, I spoke to the Armed Forces Minister, James Heapy. He told me it was not guaranteed that Russia would take territory in the Donbass region.
I don't think there's an inevitability at all. I mean, I think the last time that I had the privilege of speaking for the government in the morning was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we were reflecting then on how imminent the demise of Mariupol may be, and yet those fighters that are in Mariupol defending it so heroically are still going. I think we'll see a conflict between two forces that are much more evenly balanced, where the Ukrainians have the advantage of defensive positions that have been dug in and prepared over the last 8 years. And that's going to make it an extraordinarily difficult nut for the Russians to crack. And I think that with all of the support that the Ukrainians are getting from around the world, there's every chance that the Ukrainians can see them off.
Our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, joins us. Morning, TC. Look, I mean, the Minister's really talking a very good game, but we should be under no doubt. I mean, the Ukrainians are under an awful lot of pressure, and they continue to need as much assistance as we and others can provide.
Indeed, and the government are announcing more support all the time. We heard from the Defence Secretary yesterday about the possibility of us sending the Poles sending Soviet-era tanks to Ukraine, and we backfill. They're talking about all kinds of military equipment, but also things like ambulances and fire engines, which we're going to hear more about today. But how does this all end? Well, Boris Johnson was the first Western leader to say on his India trip, they sometimes always get a bit too candid when they're abroad, he said that there was a realistic possibility that Russia might win the war. He was the first Western leader to say that, caused some consternation in EU capitals. No one's quite sure how this is going to pan out. James Heappey was there saying, look, it's not inevitable that some of these cities in eastern Ukraine will fall, and we're going to try and give the Ukrainians everything they can to try and fight for them. But certainly this may play out over a very long time, and there's little illusions in Number 10 and elsewhere that this is not going to be over quickly.
I wonder if the public knows that, however. Tamara, for now, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's stick with the topic. We can speak once again to the former Director of Policy Planning at NATO, Fabrice Potier. Fabrice, lovely to see you again. I wonder if we could start, if possible, with what's taking place in the east of the country. I put the question to James Heappey, the Armed Forces Minister at the Ministry of Defence this morning. Is there an inevitability that the Russians will take territory in that part of the country?
I think nothing should be dismissed at this stage, but clearly the message we heard from, including the US Defense Secretary, is that this is still, the jury is out as to whether the Russians are going to prevail or not. So it's very much in our hands and in the support we provide to the Ukrainians that can decide whether the Russians are indeed going to grab more territory, going to kill more people, or on the contrary, whether they're going to do one of their so-called tactical withdrawal, which is what they have done essentially for the first part of this war, when they had to withdraw from Kiev and from other cities. So I think it's still very much open, and it's very much dependent on the kind of support we are providing to the Ukrainians.
One wonders, though, whether Vladimir Putin's ambitions are limited to Ukraine. I mean, what do you make of the suggestion that Moldova could soon find itself in the firing line, so to speak? Transnistria, of course, a series of blasts were seen there yesterday.
Well, of course, nothing should be dismissed with Vladimir Putin, but what he's also known for is to open alternative fires of fronts to distract our attention. I think that the reality is that his forces are now in the eastern Donbass, and they're kind of digging in for potentially a long war of attrition and destruction. And the question really in our hands is, how can we push back? So yes, Moldova could be next if you look at the geographic position, but really the Russians have not managed to seize Odessa. So it will take a lot of forces and capabilities from them to do what they have failed to do over the past few weeks.
We heard yesterday, of course, following his visit to the Ukrainian capital from the US Secretary of Defense. He suggested that the American ambition is to see Russia diminished so that an invasion of this type could never be seen again. I mean, first and foremost, do you think that is the strategy? And second, was it wise to say it out loud? I mean, it doesn't exactly provide incentive to Vladimir Putin to withdraw.
I think it's all cards on the table, quite frankly. And what he said was quite candid, and actually I think shared by many governments, and especially NATO governments. However, it is also clear that some other NATO governments, including probably France, is not of the same view. It's more about, we have to stop this war as soon as possible and somehow bring Russia back into a more kind of mainstream power entente. So I think these are where there's some deep divergence between the US, UK, and some other NATO members. But I do think that goal is very sensible one, because clearly now we see that we just can't let Putin get away with it once again and do another Ukraine or launch another huge war in a couple of years. So I think that goal is sensible, but then goal is obviously also risky of an escalation with Russia.
Fabrice Potier, always good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Tonight at 7 p.m, we will be discussing the progress of the war in Ukraine so far and exactly what Putin's next move could be. Dermot Murnahan will be here with a panel of guests. That's War in Ukraine, Putin's next move at 7 o'clock tonight. Johnny Depp was back on the stand yesterday in his defamation trial against ex-wife Amber Heard. The court heard recordings of the actors arguing, while Depp described the physical and emotional anguish the relationship put him through. Sky's David Blevins has this report, but first just a warning. It does contain audio recordings of the couple arguing, offensive language and graphic descriptions of injuries.
Far from the glitz and glamour of their days on the red carpet together, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard were in the courtroom for a third week, jurors listening to audio recordings of them arguing.
Go put your cigarettes out on someone else. You have consequences for your actions. That's it.
Shut up, fat ass.
Yeah, you got me there.
Depp and Heard are suing each other over an opinion piece she wrote about domestic violence. In another recording, while discussing the media storm around them, she appeared to advise Depp to talk about his own experience as a victim.
Tell people that it was a fair fight and see what the jury and judge think. Tell the world, Johnny. Tell them, Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp, man, I'm a victim too of domestic violence, and yes. It's a fair fight.
Depp's former house manager, who told the court his first job was in Buckingham Palace, revealed he'd been the person who found the tip of the actor's finger following a row between the couple.
I walked back upstairs to the kitchen and got a bag, little plastic bag, put the fingertip in there, set it on top of some ice in this plastic kitchen container.
Johnny Depp, who has now finished giving evidence, said he'd built his Captain Jack Sparrow character from the ground up and described being dropped from Pirates of the Caribbean as having become guilty until proven innocent. David Blevins, Sky News, Washington.
Tesla billionaire Elon Musk has promised to prioritise free speech on Twitter after striking a deal to buy the platform in a takeover worth more than $34 billion. Pounds, I should say, actually. It's even higher. The move comes as Twitter faces mounting pressure from critics to regulate misinformation on the site. We're joined now by former British Army intelligence officer Philip Ingram. Philip, very good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning.
What on earth do you make of this? I'm not talking about the amount of money because, frankly, it's traded, well, up until now it's been traded publicly. But what do you make of the world's richest man taking on perhaps one of the world's most significant social media platforms?
Well, I think the amount of money is important because here's where I'm going to embarrass myself with my maths. But $44 billion is about just over $150 a person for every user on Twitter. Yet Twitter's free. Elon Musk clearly thinks that every single individual is worth that amount of money. And that is because people's data is the new gold, and he sees that data as being critically important. And the key question here is, what is he going to do with that data to get his $150+ per person value out of it and make profit on top of that?
When I was reading kind of Elon Musk's statement yesterday after the announcement, the one line that leapt out to me was his ambition to authenticate the world, to give everyone that blue tick. Up until this point, I mean, one of the advantages of this platform, of Twitter, has been the anonymity that it affords. You can go on under an assumed name and assumed identity if you so desire.
Well, that anonymity, as most Twitter users will have experienced, leads to an awful lot of abuse. Because people feel as if they can hide behind the anonymity. For those anonymous individuals out there, you can't hide, you will be known. But it's much better if we can get a more assured platform, and that will enable, hopefully, a better debate that's out there. But the important thing is understanding who can actually manipulate the data behind it, because it's getting those feeds into your personal feed. It's been shown beforehand where big data has been manipulated. For example, the Cambridge Analytica scandal that happened a few years back, that it can influence people and influence people's thinking. And we have to make sure that Elon Musk is not in a position where he can abuse his position from owning such a powerful platform.
So when Elon Musk says that free speech is the bedrock of a functioning democracy and that his takeover is all about free speech, you're not exactly taking him at face value?
Well, his motivation is not to provide and enable democracy. His motivation is to make money, as he does with all of his business ventures, because he's a businessman. So he's going to do something to make money. He does that through a free platform. It's free for us to use, but he targets advertising at us. We have to make sure that advertising is just for goods and services that we want. It's not done in such a way to try and manipulate the way people are thinking, to manipulate the stories so that it adjusts people's political thinking or in other ways. And there's some very good research and very good science out there about how the power of messaging can be used to manipulate the way people think, no matter how free thinkers individuals think that they are. If it's targeted in certain ways, it can be very influential. And for one individual to have that might be a little bit too powerful.
I do wonder, though, just how this kind of free speech Twitter will fare. We've got an online safety bill going through Parliament at the moment where you receive pretty significant fines for content which is entirely legal but termed in inverted commas harmful.
Well, I think the online safety bill is critical. Too often people are hiding behind the excuse of free speech, and actually the power that the people that own these platforms have is enormous, and they have to take responsibility for some of the content that's on there. If the content is abusive, if the content is suggesting violence or suggesting anything that would be inappropriate if you're talking to someone face to face, then those that are owning the platform need to have some form of incentive to force them to police it, and that's why I think the online harms bill is definitely the right way forward. It's going to be interesting to see the detail in it and how it's applicable across the globe.
Philip Ingram, great to have you on the show this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, you may well have noticed the world has been grappling with COVID for around 2.5 years now, with countries continuing to approach the virus differently. Currently, the Chinese capital, Beijing, is bracing itself for possible lockdown after a rise in cases, with around 26 new deaths reported over the weekend. Compared to that here in the UK, now there are no virus restrictions, but just taking a look, the 7-day average on the 24th of April, 39,077, 23,791 new cases reported yesterday. Let's speak to someone who's been on this programme more than a few times, the WHO's Special Envoy for the global COVID-19 response, Dr. David Nabarro. Good to see you again, Dr. Nabarro.
Hello to you. Hello to viewers. How do you do?
Thank you very much. Could we start with China? How concerned are you that we are seeing such dramatically different approaches to dealing with COVID in various parts of the world? I just mentioned here, new cases reported here, almost 24,000. You go to China, where there are reporting a handful of new cases in comparison, and they're preparing to lock down the capital.
Yes, it is amazing, isn't it? I think it'll take still a few more months for different leaders around the world to come together and work out the best way to deal with COVID. Right now, there's still a bit of a debate. Do you try to prevent the COVID completely with really strong measures as is being applied in China? Or do you basically let things go and let the virus do what it wants to, which is becoming the British style? And of course, those of us in the World Health Organization, as we tend to do, say, look, it's a middle path. And the middle path is to keep that virus back and to stop it just infecting everybody, because it can have long-term effects and it causes a lot of absenteeism. But at the same time, to try not to lock down a whole society, because the economic and social consequences are terrible. And it's that middle path that more and more countries are moving on to.
But just to focus on those countries that, as you say, are letting things go. Again, on the 24th of this month, here in the UK, we reported 320 deaths. Is it the case that countries which are doing similar to that which we're doing here in the UK, is this just pursuing herd immunity by another name?
Well, it would be good if herd immunity really is a reasonable objective. Just for everybody to know, and I'm sure you've all seen it, you get infected with COVID, and if you're unlucky, you get infected again a few months later. Why is that? Because unlike with other infections, once you've had COVID, the body defences actually wane over time. And in older people or in people with less strong immunity, they wane quicker. And that's why we get infected again and again. And that's why we're not ever going to have complete immunity of the whole population. It will always be declining over time. And that's why we will have regular surges of disease. It just fortunately, because we do tend to be up to date on our vaccinations, those surges will not be associated with a lot of death. There's still far too many people dying, but it's not the big numbers that we saw over a year ago.
Just then, should we now be looking towards, I can't believe I'm saying this and I haven't even, put my swimming trunks on and been to the beach yet, we're this side of summer, but should we already be looking ahead to what might be coming down the pipeline autumn and winter this year? I mean, we always see it, haven't we? We've seen it every year. We've seen that dip over the summer months because, of course, respiratory illness is not transmitting in the same way. Should we be preparing for a surge coming later on this year?
Absolutely. My language is like this. Prepare for your surges, prevent transmission when the virus is around, and protect people who are most at risk. 3 P words. I believe that people are the solution, and with those concepts of preparing, preventing, and protecting, we will be able to deal with this. There will be surges, we should be ready, and the people in the hospitals and in public health offices, they're already hard at work because they know what's coming down the pipe, as you say.
Briefly, if we can, Dr. Nabarro, masks. Yes. I mean, should we all just be wearing them as a matter of course, in your view?
Well, I certainly believe that we should be wearing masks in places where we're confined, such as, for example, indoor hospitality. I believe we should be maintaining physical distance, but that doesn't mean that I believe everybody should be locked down. It's just I think the masks still are useful. Here they are.
Doctor, indeed, well done. Dr. David Nabarro, good to see you. Hope you're well. We'll speak again soon.
Thank you. I am well. Good best wishes to you.
Now let's leave you with some lovely pictures. These are 2 crew members on the RRS Sir David Attenborough. And they have been, this is very interesting, the first same-sex couple to marry in Antarctica. I have to admit, I wouldn't be wearing a kilt up there. Stuart's Eric Bourne and Stephen Carpenter have been together for 20 years. They were married by Will Whately, the ship's captain, at the British Antarctic Survey's Rothera Research Station. And again, I will say, kilts, they're fine if you're in Scotland. Yeah, and the Antarctic, I'm not quite so sure. Anyway, stick with us. Coming up after the break, the Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, told me it's not inevitable that towns and cities in eastern Ukraine will fall to Russia. We will be back there with our team of correspondents, producers and cameras on the ground to bring you all the latest after this.